All right, we will get started here at 9 o'clock on the dot. First of all, we just want to thank you, as always, for joining us here. We are very thankful that you've committed to spending 30 minutes of your day with us, and we're just really excited to share this time with you all. Our time together is brief, but we really are confident that you're going to take something meaningful away from our session today. As many of you probably already know, David has more than 35 years of experience as a family therapist. He's a best-selling author. He's worked with CEOs from all over the world, presented to countless organizations, and is just so passionate for helping people connect with their most authentic self. The Authentic Leadership Academy, which we'll be giving a brief taste of today, is just one of the many ways that David loves to share his gift for connecting people with the best versions of themselves. Today's topic, we're going to be talking about fostering trust. And in November, we'll dive into this topic as well as many others in a lot more detail. It's going to be truly transformational, the time we spend together in November. If you feel called to join us, we would absolutely love to have you. So thanks again for joining us this morning. It's always inspiring and encouraging to see leaders who want to step up and be the best version of themselves. So without further ado, here is David.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for coming. We were just appreciate always your usual positive presence and enthusiasm, Kristen, on our team and in all of our calls here. I was just thinking this week how we're all getting a little zoomed out, and I just appreciate people being here. Kristen and I were just talking before we started, and I had a webinar scheduled. And this week it was a very stimulating webinar I wanted to learn about. And, I just didn't make time to get on because for whatever reason, I just think webinars are just beginning to be in the, less of a priority for me. So I just appreciate everybody being here. And the fact is, we were just talking also about the Academy. And I was thinking maybe we should have made it in person this fall. We'll definitely have an in-person one in the spring, but we also have people registered now from all across the country and the United States, people that just wouldn't ordinarily get together in a time like this. So it does make it it makes it optional. I mean, an optional program, but also a great opportunity to get to know people from, globally that you wouldn't ordinarily do in person. So there's got to be that balance going forward. But anyway, nonetheless, I just appreciate everybody being here. So again, just to be completely transparent, my agenda, Kristen mentioned, really is to introduce you this morning to the Academy, to our SAGE forums, which are peer mentoring support groups that are monthly meetings that start in October. And if you're interested, by all means, look that up. And our Academy. So just to put it in context with what we're doing this morning, this virtual experience, people talk about it being, virtually building confidence, getting clarity, making connections, building community. These are some of the words that people have used to describe the experience of being together in 3 days. So we dive into this material much deeper. I'm just giving you a very quick overview this morning. So my whole model here that I built around this in my book, The Other Everest, is the outer circle is culture. The middle circle is what we call leadership practices. And then in the inner circle is leadership presence, those inner qualities. And as much as abilities are important, it's those inner qualities that really matter. But what we're going to do today is we're going to focus on one module in the 3 days that we have together called Fostering Building Trust. And in terms of the whole outline in November from 1 to 3, we have the first day is all about leadership presence. The second day is all about leadership practice. And then the third day is about integrating them together in our cultures that we live and work in. So this is the one component of the second day, just to see where it fits in. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of a taste to this notion of trust. So trust is something I think we all instinctively know is important, but we don't often sit and really examine what it means. It's a little bit like oxygen, when it's there. In fact, if you think about the trusting relationships in your life, just take a moment and ask yourself, just in your own mind's eye, picture people in your own life that you would say you have a high trust relationship. Chances are, if you have a high trust relationship, you probably haven't talked about trust in that relationship for some time. One of the indicators of trust is that it's just there. You just know that it's there and you don't talk about it. In fact, if you're talking about trust in your relationship, it probably means, or likely might mean, that you're in some trouble. So I'm just breaking this. As I say, it's a little bit like oxygen. You take it for granted when it's there, but when it's not there, you really know when it's not there. So I use my definition of trust is that it's a belief in and a reliance upon something and someone. So I'm imagining these two acrobats with Cirque du Soleil. I'm imagining that before they would have jumped in to do this act together, even in a practice, they would have observed each other. And so they had a belief in each other. They had a belief that says, you know what, the other person is trustworthy. And then they have to work together. And I'm just imagining the hours before they get on stage, the hours of practice and build it. And they're not just practicing their skills, they're actually integrating and building that level of trust to be able to perform at this level. So every relation, this is one of the things that you can begin to break down and dissect a little bit around your relationships, is to begin to ask yourself, when there's a breakdown in trust, was it a relational issue or an accountability issue? So there's two issues. So for example, there's a relationship. This is the belief in. So I could really engage people this morning, and I could make a connection with you, which I hope I do, and that I could have a belief in. I could make a connection with you. But folks, if I didn't show up, if I didn't have reliable material, if I wasn't accountable, then that trust would obviously be diminished. At the same time, I could show up on time and have all my slides in order, but if I don't make a connection with you, if I don't build a bridge with you, then that trust is also going to be diminished. So there's a relational component and there's an accountability component. So in our time this morning, we're going to talk about the connectability piece. I'm just going to introduce you to this. Next week, we're going to talk about accountability. So there's the hard piece around showing up. And that's the piece that we're going to cover in our mini session next week around accountability, because both are important, but I'm just going to dissect the accountability out. Now, let me tell you a little bit about me. For those of you who have heard me speak or know me, know that I have a very strong, I get claustrophobic. I have a very strong reaction to closed spaces. And for me, it's about control. So if, for example, in an elevator, I will get claustrophobic in an elevator, but as long as I know that it's working and that I can exit, I'm okay. But when I don't have control, I get very anxious. And my big claim to fame in my family is that we all went up to West Edmonton. When my kids were little, we went up to West Edmonton Mall back when there was a submarine in the mall. And we all took this submarine ride, and the guide in the submarine, as soon as the door closed, we went underwater. And she said, if any of you get claustrophobic, there's this little exit that you climb out. And as soon as she said claustrophobic, I welled up with anxiety. I got sweaty palms. And my big claim to fame is that I got rescued from the submarine in West Edmonton Mall. So I climbed up the ladder, took a little rowboat, climbed up this ladder up into the mall. And so my kids today will still make fun of me, but in a light way. But so I have a very strong reaction to closed spaces. So when my kids, not long after this, we planned a summer vacation where we went into Timpanogos Cave in Utah. And we spent a week traveling through Utah. It's one of my favorite places on the planet. I went to graduate school at the University of Utah, and so I know the national parks there quite well. Anyway, Timpanogos Bay, we decided we're going to go and we're going to do some caving. And I'll tell you, I was sweating this for 2 weeks. My kids knew that I was sweating this for 2 weeks, but I said, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. Now, this is the entrance to our cave. This is Royce, our guide. And this is it's an hour and a half trip into the cave. And about an hour of that is in this kind of a closed space. And so I got there, we got there early. I was sweating and I was very, very anxious. And what I did is I went to the guide and I said, listen, Royce, I'm claustrophobic. I'm going to have a real tough time today. I don't know if I can get through this. I really need your help. And he put his arm around me, gave me the light. And he said, listen, you get to the front of the line, come with me. We're in this together. I'm in your corner. We'll get through this. I've worked a lot with this. He was a school teacher, actually, just volunteered his time up there as a ranger during the summer. Beautiful, beautiful guy. And he got me through it and I trusted him. And there was something about his presence, something about his personality, something about his character, his style. It wasn't just something that he learned, and this is why trust is a complex thing. And this whole connectability, he had the ability. I mean, I trusted his competence because of his role and his uniform, but more importantly, I trusted his presence because of how he came across in such a caring way. And he said, look, we're in this together. And there was something about that I'm not sure can be taught in a leadership course. It's really in you. And that's why this leadership presence in that inner circle can't really be separated from the practice, because you can't learn this technique of how to build trust. It really is in you as you begin to explore yourself and get to know yourself in more detail. Leadership, here's some of the principles. Leadership without trust is compliance. Anybody with a position of leadership can get somebody to get something done if somebody needs a job, but it's compliance. And leadership with trust is commitment. And this is really what we're after. You have to get to people's hearts before you ask them for a hand. And people buy into the leader and then they buy into the vision. People have to buy into the leader. They have to connect with the leader. I found it very interesting. I was just telling Kristen before the call too, that I was on the U of C campus and talking to a professor, and he was saying that when students first came back to school this last fall, they were all very anxious. They'd been 2 years in their basements in front of their computers, and they were all very anxious. They were all very, visibly very scared. Heads were down. There was no eye contact, and there was just a lot of, it was an eerie feeling. But within a week, those, the students started to connect with each other. They came out of themselves. And it's such a different feeling when people make connections and people feel a part of, and they begin to trust. And I can just imagine, in my words, there's that sense of fear when you're going back into something new. And we're finding this all the time in our workplaces, people coming back into the workplaces. There's a whole gamut of mental health challenges. There's a whole gamut of reluctance on the spectrum of reluctance to come back to work, trusting. And it's a great opportunity to actually build bridges of trust if we take time and make those connections. But it's critical that we do. So how do you know if people trust you? Everybody says, trust is important. How do you actually measure that? So I've got my list here. And again, if we had some time, we could brainstorm this, but these are my 7 ways. Number 1, they seek your advice. Doesn't mean you have to give them advice, but when people come to you for advice, that's an indication that they trust you. We don't seek advice from people that we don't trust, that we're not connected to. They ask you for help. By the way, if you haven't had people ask you for help, that's always a bit of a red flag, particularly if they're your direct reports, people within your care. You might want to just question, are you really setting up an environment here where people feel trusting of you? These are just red flags if it's not there. They're honest with you. They bring you the bad news. Folks, there's always bad news in organizations and in life. And can they bring you the bad news? Can they bring you the good news? Do they challenge you? Is there a commitment and a sense of engagement around you? And frankly, you're relaxed and at peace with yourself. One of the big things you want to ask yourself is how you're dealing with your own level of stress. Because one of the things that will break down trust is a lack of people feeling that they're safe. And one of the ways that people don't feel safe is that when their boss is tense and unpredictable. So here's my little story for the day. It's my, some of you have heard my story around this, the tale, pun intended here, the tale of two dogs. These are our two dogs, Lenny and Enzo. And what we need to realize is that trust is not just a set of techniques. It's an interaction between people, and it's an interaction with the world around us. It has to be contextualized when we talk about trust. So Lenny, well, I'll just tell you the story about these two dogs. They come from totally different backgrounds. So Lenny was raised, he's a cross between a Saint Bernard and a Rottweiler. And these are two purebreds that got mixed up in the kennel. It was a little bit of an oops pregnancy, but it's a beautiful dog. He was raised with people from the time he was born. He was around people. The litter was around people. They were socialized. This is my daughter, loving Lenny when he was a puppy. They were connected. There was all kinds of trust in his early months. He was imprinted to human beings. He's deeply connected to people. In fact, this stance that we took this picture, this is his go-to stance. This is his default stance, is that he will lie like he will manipulate anybody that comes into the house to rub his stomach, okay, to rub his chest and scratch his chest. So this is his go-to stance because he is completely trusting of the world. There's no aggression in him at all because he's completely trusting of the world. Now, Enzo, on the other hand, was a rescue dog. He lived in a kennel for 10 months and had no human contact that we know of. Now, I don't think he was abused because he's not aggressive, but this is his stance. And you look into his eyes and begin to see the fear, and this is his stance. And so my dear wife, who is absolutely a dog whisperer, it took her 3 years to get him to be able to be vulnerable, to open up and to relax. And even to this day, when we have strangers come into the house, if he doesn't know them, he will go and hide because he's still reluctant. But we're beginning over the period of years. He's been with us now almost 5 years, but the trust has come very, very slowly. So you never know. Trust is a co-created effort. And so, yes, we can do all we can, and we have to make every effort we can to make it safe for Enzo. We still have to realize that he has a part in this. And some people, you can create a great, open, trusting environment, but maybe they've been, you don't know the experience and the stories that people bring to their workplace and the experiences that they've had with people and authority figures in their life, with people in other organizations, with former bosses, that you have to sometimes overcome, and you just never know when this time comes. In fact, Enzo will still never open up unless he's got Val's hand there helping him feel safe. So we're all different this way, and we all have had different experiences growing up, and I think we really need to respect the fact that we all come to this, our work, in a different way, but it's about being connected to know this. We know from cellular biology that the cells in our body really only have two purposes: to protect us or to grow. And if we want to grow in an organization, you do not want people to feel scared. And we get into psychological safety a lot more in the academy. We'll dive much more deeply into that module. But basically what we're saying is we need to create a safe place, particularly when we're in a position of authority that, we don't get, as I say, when you get promoted, you don't get more power. What you do is get more accountability. And the accountability here as a leader is to create a place where people can feel safe enough to grow. And this is where trust gets, where trust gets fostered and built, is when cells can relax. And this is biology as much as it is psychology, where cells enough relax where they can begin to expand and to grow. And this is the work of a leader, is to create that kind of a climate. But we all have a part. It's not just the positional leader's role to make that culture happen. We all play a part in co-creating, as I say, a safe, trusting place to grow in. So if anybody has ever flown here, which I've spent a good part of my life on airlines, you know that sometime during the airline check-in process, you're going to get asked this: are you connecting? This is it's obviously an airline question, but I'm going to ask the question of every person on this call. Think of the people in your life. If you're a parent, think of your kids. If you're a positional leader, think of the people under your care, your colleagues, your boss. Ask this question: are you connecting? It's a very critical question to stop and ask yourself. How are you making those connections? Connect before you expect. I have to tell you that I really learned this from my kids and my wife. When my kids were little, and I would sometimes be traveling 3 or 4 days in a row, and I would come home and they had a list of chores. And when I came in through the door, I hadn't been there sometimes 3 or 4 days, and I noticed that they hadn't done their chores and that they hadn't been keeping up on things. Now, I start to feel, first of all, I'm feeling a little guilty because I was not there and not there on top of things. And so what I would do is that I would walk around the house and start harping on them and start getting on their case. The first thing I'd walk in the door, first of all, I'm tired from the trip, but that's on me. That's not their responsibility to suffer the consequence of my tiredness. And what my wife would often do is she would take me aside in those days and said, Dave, maybe you should practice what you preach. Why don't you connect with them before you expect? My job, if I had not been in that house for a while, my job was to reconnect with them, to build that relationship with them before I expect. I'm not saying I don't have expectations of them, but I got to make sure that that connection is there before I'm expecting. This is why the onboarding process, the hiring process is so critical with people in organizations. Sometimes we just throw people into a job and they don't have a connection. And then we wonder why they're not engaged. So just ask yourself, who do you expect from and where's that connection? Everybody communicates, but very few people connect. This is a John Maxwell quote. I think, this is certainly, I'm going to age myself here, but I know in this generation, it deeply, deeply concerns me that we all communicate with each other with these devices, but are we really connecting? And, we know that when you're standing with a person and you are holding a device, that if you hold that device in the conversation, it impacts the conversation, versus when a person comes into your office and you take that phone and you open a drawer and you put that phone away, or you visibly show that you're turning that phone off, that this person is the most important person in my life at this moment, is a critical question to give. We are a little bit shortchanged, particularly coming out of this pandemic. We haven't had a lot of practice. It's a weak muscle that we have in terms of sitting down face to face and having these conversations. Kevin used to taught me a great deal in my early years in my career about this notion of a trust account, that we have deposits and we have withdrawals. And there's a critical point here, is that you can't make withdrawals in an organization. You can't make withdrawals in it, just like a bank account. You can't make withdrawals in a relationship until you have made deposits. And so just ask yourself, stop and reflect for a few minutes. The people in your personal life, people in your work life, where have you made deposits? Where have you made withdrawals? Think of the relationships and think, boy, where do you need to make deposits and where do you need to make withdrawals? And so there's 3 critical words that I use to talk about the summary. We get into this in much more detail in the academy, but appreciation, recognition, and empathy. How do we show appreciation? How do we recognize people? And how do we show empathy to people that make deposits? And you can take a little inventory about where you need to, this is a little action that can come out of this. Think of one relationship in your life right now that maybe there's not an accountability there. Maybe there's not an engagement there. Maybe there's not trust. Think about, where can I make some deposits? Now, Gary Chapman wrote a book years ago called The Language of Love. And he's a couple therapist. And he said that there's 5 languages that people have fundamentally around how they show love. And then what he did is that he did work with Paul, and he rewrote the book, but called it The Language of Appreciation for application in the workplace. And what he discovered through his research and work is that we all kind of have 5 different languages, primary ways that we get appreciated. I'm a words guy. I love words. This is my art form. I love to craft words. I love to write. I love to hear words. If you want to express appreciation, you know, write me an email, write me a note in the chat room. This is how you appreciation. The other, show me appreciation. Physical touch. I have a file that was, you know, 3 inches thick before computers, where everybody who sent me a thank you card, I kept. I have a bulletin board here with thank you notes. Now I transferred that into my computer, but I have a whole file called encouragement file. And if I feel low and I feel like I'm not making much of a contribution in my life, I will go into that file and I will read what people say. So it means a great deal to me. I will keep thank you notes forever. Physical touch. I'm a handshake and a heart guy. I love, you know, I'm a touch, and, you know, I love to pat people on the shoulder. I love to shake hands. I'm a hugs and handshake guy. So if you know, this is why the pandemic for me has been very difficult. I'm also very intense. And I grew up in a family where, you loved intensely. Well, I married a woman who's very stable, and she's an acts of service person. She makes me work. You can't just buy her some flowers and expect that that's the only way to show her appreciation. You gotta, so I feel like sometimes I don't get that sense of appreciation from her because I'm also a guy that was raised to feel like I'm special. And so you got to make me feel special. And so I sometimes don't feel appreciated because Val doesn't make me feel special in my way. But then I began to realize, I was talking to my mentor the other day, who's an 80-year-old, my spiritual guide. And she said, well, how much special, this is just something that has surfaced in my own relationship, quite honestly. And she said, well, how special do you make Val feel? And so that's what it's always, instead of what I can get, what can I give? And what I realized that for Val, it's just a simple act of coming home, working in the garden, taking on a project together. This is where she feels special. And it goes beyond what it's not necessarily what I need to feel special, but I need to do it in her way, not in my way. And that actually, when I can be that kind of a person and express appreciation in her way, it comes back to me tenfold. Okay. So folks, I am going to, in conclusion here, I'm going to show you a little video. It's actually about a 4-minute video. So we're probably going to go over time. If you need to jump off, no problem. But I'm going to show you a little video on empathy, because you know what? Everybody has a story. And what we need to realize is that stop and realize everybody has a story, from the clerk that you buy your groceries from, to the colleague at work, to the person who's afraid to come to work. We all have a story. And my message, bottom line, is we need to slow down. We need to open our hearts, and we need to really deeply appreciate where people are coming from. And we need to build those relationships that are so fundamental if we're going to work together. We can't just give people, we can't just give people a job and expect them to be sustained and belong and to feel like they're going to be a part of the community. We have to really make an effort to really build that empathy. So I'm going to just show this video. I hope you appreciate it, and then we'll come back.